All right, so let's get started. I'm at Powell Barnett. Yesterday we attempted Frink, but the ravine really impacted the cell phone signal. So I hope you guys can hear me. Makes me feel like you could maybe hear me. A lot better signal, and I even have a backup cell phone in my pocket. So we should be okay today, hopefully. So like I said, I'm at a park in central Seattle called Powell Barnett. And for a lot of people, they're probably not familiar with this park or don't think of it as a Green Seattle Partnership site because it's not a huge forest. In fact, there's really no remnant forest here. But it's a really critical part of the structure that we're building across the city, where we've got pocket parks that have healthy native habitat as well as larger green belts just downhill. So Powell Barnett, and I'll flip it around so that you guys can see the park. Powell Barnett is the old site of the Garfield track and field, and in the 60s was developed as a playground and field. And so if you're looking for a space to spread out, this is an awesome community park to enjoy. And on the edge here, there is about a third of an acre of Green Seattle Partnership restoration sites. I'll kind of back up and give you a sense of that. Really narrow band of forest. But again, kind of an important space for us to be building habitat, and a complicated space as well. With the number of neighbors that we have, I mean, I think you can kind of get a sense of it if I pause right here. That's the distance from the edge of the walkway, the paved walkway, up the hill to the edge of the park property. So really, we have this small, narrow band of future forest that we're working with, and it's a highly disturbed site, and so we have lots and lots of invasive plants that we get to cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into that. The first plant that I'm going to start with is newly redefined by King County Noxious Weeds. Just this last year, it was reclassified to Class B and required for control. Does anybody recognize it? It's a good one. It's in the carrot family. If you're immediately like, wait a second, is that a giant carrot? Here, I should flip it back around so you can kind of get the sense of the size. This is me. This is the top of the plant up here. So this is poison hemlock. Let's flip around again. Nobody needs to see my face. And one of the key characteristics for identifying it is the purple in the stem. And then the flowers, which are just about to emerge, probably a little bit more heat, and we'll have some flowers, will be white, very similar to carrot flowers if you've ever let a carrot go to seed, and kind of the umbel shape. And this is a huge problem because it is highly toxic. Its claim to fame is that it's the plant that killed Socrates. And it's toxic to humans and wildlife as well as livestock. And so that was part of the reason for reclassifying it. This is obviously a site right here along a paved path with lots of people active, where we would we want to make sure we're controlling it. Like I said, it's required for control everywhere. So if you're seeing this in your yard, definitely an important one to get after and to be cautious about as you're doing so. Definitely wash your hands after you do it. Be wearing gloves. Be wearing long sleeves. Giant hogweed is a similar plant that can have really bad skin effects. Poison hemlock, as far as I understand, doesn't have that same impact, but there's definitely some people who've experienced kind of what's the word for it? Dermal impacts when they've cut it and gotten the sap on their skin. So be really cautious about that. In this site, one of the lookalikes that would be interesting to kind of pay attention to is that we have some yarrow here. And again, it's a pretty significantly different leaf, but it has that kind of feathery shape, and especially as they're small and just emerging, it's worth kind of being able to distinguish these in restoration sites especially. So just kind of hold the leaf there. Hopefully you can see much smaller at this point, and it's also just about to flower. But if we come along the line here, There's some smaller poison hemlock down the way that is just still in that probably first year phase. So it'll be a rosette in the first year and then shoot up in its second year. And yeah, so we'll get after this. In fact, I'll probably come back and dig it this next week since I'm close by. And our parks crews are very, very busy taking care of COVID response with limited staffing. So it's a hard year to get after this level of noxious weeds. Fortunately, it's considered an essential service for Seattle Parks and Recreation, and so we're out trying to make sure that this kind of public health concern is taken care of. So let me wander this way a little bit. Second thing I wanted to show y'all was Bluebells, or Scylla, is kind of the species name, or the genus name. I'm actually not sure of the species name, but it is so widespread. This is just past blooming. You can kind of, I'll try and hold this still again. I don't know how the quality of this is, but you can just kind of barely see that bell shape. These would have been hanging here, but they're starting to fatten up, and this is where they're going to have a ton of seeds. We could actually break one open and see what we've got inside. And they do an amazing job of reseeding themselves all across parkland. It's in, I would say, probably 90% of the yards that I walked by on my way here, including my own yard. It's really hard to get rid of. It's got a deep bulb, and so can be complicated to control. If I dig down in here, you can kind of get a sense of what the leaves look like. It emerges in early spring, late winter, and can look a lot like any other bulb. And it's actually in the asparagus family, I learned today, which is exciting. And in some ways, you know, it's a good way to kind of remember, okay, Asparagaceae, it has that kind of a similar look in the stalk. So at this point in the year, there's really no chance that you're going to dig out the bulb and get much out of it. It's really deep, and one of the things with this plant, kind of its way of being successful, not only being able to reseed readily, as soon as you start digging, you're more likely to break off the stems and the leaves from the bulb and get to the bulb. So at this point in the year, one of the things that we recommend doing is just coming through and cutting back and removing that seed source. A lot of times we see it just kind of coming downhill from people's yards. It's just like bumping down the hill. Hopefully that's not too loud. There's a mean game of pickup basketball happening behind me. Unfortunately, seems like that's not allowed with distancing rules. Let me come back here a little bit. There's one thing right next to it that's super cool, and I want to be able to show you guys. So the Scylla Control, this time of year, just pop these off, grab the stems, and then throw them away. Don't compost them on site, otherwise they'll just continue to ripen and mature, and then you'll have more Scylla or Bluebells, as the common name is, all around your site. So, like I was saying, there's something cool right next door. This is a beautiful camas that was planted as part of Green Seattle Partnership restoration work, which makes this really tricky. We very rarely have camas. I wouldn't say super rare, but it's less common that it's planted at restoration sites. We had lots of sunshine here, and we were looking for some nice flowers to kind of bring people attention to the site. Also, I love camas, and of course I would want to plant it here. But this makes it a little bit tricky. Camas is in the lily family, so slightly different leaf attachments. It's not a bunch of leaves right at the base. If you can kind of get a sense of that, just a handful of leaves, but very similar long stalk with inflorescence flowers at the top, same color, very different flower shape. But as these mature, they do the same thing. They kind of plump up, and you could very well come through and kind of remove these not knowing that it's camas. I have a catch in my throat, which is so weird. Of course, while I'm talking to you guys. Excuse me. Okay, let's keep it moving. So, this was all pretty much dominated by blackberry when we initiated restoration in 2015. And we've got a lot of species diversity here. There was some vine maple, and actually think this Oregon grape was planted as well. But now we have mock gorge coming up in the back. We've got red currant. We've got cascara. We've got all kinds of goodness. Along with some badness, of course. This area is managed by a forest steward. So those who aren't familiar with the Green Saddle Partnership Program, we have rockstar volunteers that lead their community in restoration all across the city. And actually at this site, we have our first ever youth forest stewards that work with their mom here to take care of this site. And they just started in this last year. Acre, it is a handful of a site again because it has this history of disturbance and a little bit tricky to get in and around some of these more mature plants. So I wanted to walk you guys on over to the Sycamore Maple. I'm going to look down at the comments for the first time. Hopefully nobody's sitting there wanting to know something. So this is Sycamore Maple. Let me climb up this hill. Hopefully I won't fall down. Don't laugh if I do. I've got Crocs on. It's the footwear of choice, right? Fieldwork footwear. It's Friday. Leave me alone. Actually, it's Friday and I've been working from home for 2 months. Leave me alone. So this is Sycamore Maple, and Sycamore Maple along with Norway Maple and even Hedge Maple are naturalizing in Seattle parks. They're really common street trees or backyard trees, and so have developed affinity for Pacific Northwest habitats, and so they're able to grow kind of unchecked in our forests. And so this is one of those plants that we are commonly using herbicide on. So especially, I don't know if you can kind of see the size of those stems. They're about 2 inches across. It would be really challenging on a slope like this with not a lot of cover to come through and dig it out. And it would most likely resprout and sucker and become more of a problem. So Green Saddle Partnership has a list of woody plants, woody invasive plants that we target. These are commonly not included on the listed noxious weeds by King County. Trying to think of any of them are at this point, but you probably would recognize English holly or English laurel or cherry laurel as some common invasives that really have a huge impact on forest health. But the maples are definitely other ones that they're working to manage. Norway maple in particular is a really aggressive invader in the Midwest, and we see it in spaces like Ciecko Greenbelt, where it was planted along the boulevard as part of the Olmsted design. It is remarkably strong, has a big foothold in that park, and so it's something that we're targeting. So like I was saying, we would generally control this using herbicide, and we have a system that we've found to work really well where we're basically injecting the stem with a really small amount of concentrated herbicide and then leaving it here to die standing, potentially creating some deadwood habitat, and leaving material on site so that we can build organic matter in our site over time. So that is Sycamore Maple, Acer platanoides. Like I said, Hedge Maple, Norway Maple are the other two that are on our list. Hedge Maple is a lot of people, it's commonly planted, and in fact I think a lot of people are surprised when they see it on our list, but it's true. I'm sorry to break the news. It's naturalizing in Seattle parks. let's see. Anything else you guys are seeing along the way that you're like, what just happened? What's that? Or maybe the video quality is such that you can't see it anyway. I'm going to walk you back over kind of to the other end of the restoration site, kind of get a sense of it. Again, you know, pretty developed park. If I didn't say this before, that's Martin Luther King Way, Junior Way, that it runs up against, and then the cross streets are Jefferson on one end and Alder on the other. So as we're kind of walking this way, there's a handful of other invaders. A couple that stick out as I'm walking. Let's see. Not this one. Look at this beauty. I've got a thing for goat spirit. It's one of my favorite natives right now. And especially at this time of year where it's just starting to bloom. It's incredible. We have some ocean spray. Uphill I see some Nipple Wort. Gotta love that name. I think I actually did read something about it having some medicinal value related to breastfeeding. So there you go. Names can tell you something. This is one of the sites or parts of the site that we've had a harder time with establishment. Interestingly, there's this major pile of leaf mold here, or leaf litter that maybe we could be using as leaf mold over time. What else am I seeing up here? Some wall lettuce, a little comfrey. Actually, that might even be some foxglove, which I don't see all that often around here. And we've got a lovely swath of herb Robert, which I attempted to talk about a little bit yesterday. I think if anybody's interested in a lot more detail, Maya did an awesome job of describing it the other day in her video. Oh, the Nipple Wort flowers are yellow and small, and really it is not a listed noxious weed. Michael Yadrick, another plant ecologist with parks, has developed the name noisome weeds, and it's like on his list for control because it really does come in heavy at restoration sites and can impact some plant survival just competition wise. You can kind of get a sense of how much it's seeding right there. Or not seeding, it's growing. But it's, not a huge deal, but something to be considered. So then I'm hoping to show you guys this sunny side. I hope that you can kind of see it okay. This area was totally dominated by blackberry when we started work here. And it's in full sun. We limited tree cover here because of neighbor and community interest in having some visibility along this particular edge and on the south end of the park because of some crime issues. And we could, there is actually one pine up here, but we could definitely stand to have a little bit more cover to control some of these weeds. This is also east facing, full sun. And if you can see through the pixelated image, there's lots of awesome cover in here as well. And so it's just a matter of keeping up maintenance. And there's like major bumblebee cuteness here, just hanging. Hi, buddy. Again, on the adorable goat's beard. Love it. So, unfortunately, climbing up the goat's beard, we have bindweed. And as I mentioned yesterday, bindweed is the weed that we see that comes back. After we do all the awesome work in restoration, our monitoring plots are showing that we've been able to totally knock down and control. Oh my God, look at that one. We've been able to knock down and control a lot of other weed issues like ivy or blackberry. We still end up having this major bindweed issue, and especially in full sun sites. Unfortunately, it is this kind of setup where we've got a lot of existing native cover with the bindweed coming up and around it. It's just going to be virtually possible to eliminate. And so we'll have to consider kind of how we might come in and do some early cutting in the spring not to remove the natives, but to knock them down and gain some access to the early bindweed, potentially do some herbicide work on it, or continue to pull it. And again, really targeting flowers. I think one of the things that that is kind of worth pointing out, especially with a plant like Scylla as an example, where you really want to be targeting those satellite populations and then kind of working your way in and making sure that you're doing all the cultural work that you can do to control the species. So coming in and making sure your soil is in healthy conditions so that you can really hurry up and grow that native cover, making sure that you're coming in and removing flowers and seed sources as soon as possible, so that you're not just essentially letting the issue spread, and then looking at mechanical and manual options, and then at that point looking at herbicide options. I'm just blabbing instead of looking at the actual plants now. So what else did I want to show you? Okay, so this is also winding through here. We've got some Clematis, which Clematis vitalba, and the common name is Old Man's Beard or Traveler's Joy. Does that sound right? I think that is another one for it, which, sounds fun. And this is does an awesome job of climbing up tall trees, and I think if folks aren't familiar with it, you'd quickly recognize it. In the winter especially, it's super woody and it leaves this mess in the top of a tree, and then the seed heads are persistent and you get that kind of fluffy old man's beard. That's the name catch right there. And those seeds then hang on and disperse pretty widely. I don't know, there's no like big pocket of it here, so, and I commonly get this floating into my yard as well, so it can disperse pretty far, and it has pretty strong woody roots, and so it can be pretty challenging to dig out. I honestly think it's harder than Himalayan, or sorry, English ivy for control. So looking at it to try and identify it, this is a pretty young plant, super purple stem here, and in its current kind of new growth phase. And then we have leaflet with 5 leaves, and one here on the top. You guys able to see this? I sure hope so. And again, if we were in an area where we had it growing up high, we would treat it a lot like English ivy. We would sever the stems at chest height. We wouldn't be pulling anything down above us because we wouldn't want to drop anything on any broken limbs or debris onto ourselves or into our eyes. So sever it at chest height and then pull the vines away from the base of the tree, kind of strip it down the tree and then away from the base of the tree 5 feet. That information is all detailed in the Forest Steward Field Guide, which I'll describe at the end a little bit more. But you can definitely spend some time kind of thinking about that plan and look out for it in your own yards. And there was one other one here, Bittersweet Nightshade, just to mix in one more viney mess to this particular area. Here it is. This is in the nightshade family, Solanaceae, and it is therefore related to potatoes and tomatoes and peppers. So if you're familiar with a pepper plant or flower or anything in that family, it's got really similar flowers. These will be bright purple with a yellow center, and then they'll produce another toxic plant, and especially with those berries is one that we want to make sure people don't feel attracted to or don't consider planting. It is also really challenging to control any piece of the plant. The stem or roots fragments will resprout, and so if oftentimes we see it in wet areas, and so if we're it's one that we would want to bag and remove, especially if it's fruiting from a site. So then the last one, I don't know what time it is, so I better look at that real quick. The last one that I wanted to show you here is Himalayan Blackberry. Super obvious, maybe. Does everybody feel like it's obvious? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. This one is really pretty looking. I wonder if the little extra sun at this site is giving it some of this coloration. If you look at it, it's got these really bold bases to the at the stem, the joint of the stem and the thorn. That's what that piece of plant is called, which I don't think is super common. So again, maybe just this brand new growth got a little bit more coloration. Oftentimes we do see some red in the stem. And Himalayan Blackberry is super common across the park system and in people's yards even. I think one thing to note is that generally at this time of year we're trying to avoid removing large swaths of Himalayan Blackberry just to reduce any impact to nesting birds, ground nesting birds. The other consideration then is that we're also never ever spraying flowers if we're using herbicide for control, or fruit for that matter. So in the city's pesticide reduction plan and in our best management practices, that's a important thing to note and part of our control plan. So oftentimes you'll see park staff or our mighty professional crews, both contractors and park staff, come through and mow it down in the early spring, probably late winter would be a better way of describing that, before active bird nesting occurs, mow it down to the ground, and then come back and manage it at a much smaller size. Easier to deal with that level of debris, and then also, again, trying to make sure that we're taking care of our awesome bird and pollinator friends, other pollinators. So it is at least kind of close to 4:30, so I think I'll kind of wrap up there. Again, thank you so much for spending your Friday evening, afternoon with me. Hopefully everybody's hanging out outside, watching this video, away from people, drinking your sweet tea or whatever you might have with you, and making that connection to the plants and the land, because I think it can be a really important way of finding some health in this crazy crisis that we're in right now. Even just standing here and watching these bumblebees hang out is pretty joy-making. So hopefully you can find that in your neighborhood park and at your Green Seattle Partnership site. Like I mentioned, the Forest Steward Field Guide is an awesome resource to go look for more information about noxious weed management, as is and that can be found at www.greenseattle.org under the Forest Steward Resources tab. Noxious weeds, King County Noxious Weeds is also an awesome place to go find additional information about how to manage weeds. And I think one of the cool things about weed management and weed identification even is that really you can do it at so many different scales. You can be walking down the sidewalk seeing different things. You can be in a yard if that's what you have. You can be in a park, or you could be at a much larger scale in a forested setting and get that connection and kind of understand some of the dynamics that are happening in this natural world that we live in. So on that note, thank you all so much again. So sorry about the awkwardness of yesterday. And I'm glad that we found a park where we could hang out and check out so many different weeds. Any thoughts? Any last thoughts? You bought a tracker picker? Ooh, I like that. I also have put my children to work while we've been home and bought them both litter pickers. So we've been cleaning the neighborhood as we go. Trash. See, me and you, we're on the same page. Yeah, trash pickers. They're super fun. I am also enjoying walking and picking as we go. Any other thoughts or questions before we sign off? All right. Thank you. Take care. Have a lovely weekend.